Hello and welcome to Series 9, Episode 7 of In Suspense, a vodcast and podcast for fans and writers of crime fiction. In our last episode, we had a really interesting chat with Natalie Simmons about the rise of the feminist thriller. And, if you haven't listened to that one yet, do tune in because we really enjoyed chatting to Natalie. She's a marvellous woman has got lots of interesting things to say about feminism and writing and being in it for the long game, all those sorts of things. Today, though, we are chatting to Imran Mahmood about his latest novel, All I Said Was True. And the topic today is It's All Smoke and Mirrors. It's a great topic. Lauren always comes up with really catchy titles.
It wasn't my title. I'm pretty sure it was Nikki that came up with
Oh, was it Nikki? Oh, I beg your pardon, Nikki. Nikki always comes up with amazing titles. Mine would have probably been legal thrillers. Anyway. And it's about character. The topic we're talking about, Smoke and Mirrors, is about character point of view and how much we can get away with by misleading the reader with what they say or think or do. And Imran's book is the perfect example of this, isn't it? Of pushing this to the absolute limit, as are all his books. So we can't wait to get him on. But first of all, how have you been, Lauren? And what have you been up to this last week or so?
Well, I'm good. I have a cold at the moment, so I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself. Got one of those awful sore throats. But I am good. And we went to Natalie's book launch, didn't we? Just after we interviewed her, which was so much fun and so amazing. She's such a powerhouse. She's going to be in this industry for the next 50 years, isn't she? Taking over the world. And I've been finishing a book. So I finished on Sunday the first draft of my latest thriller for Laura North, which is good, but it still needs loads of work. So it's not like I can celebrate because I just now need to rewrite it. Actually, the other thing I did this week is I got an email from my audio publisher asking me how you pronounce certain things, which is like one of those funny things that you never really think you'll have to do as an author. But it was things like the River Stour, which we live next to, which is in the book, and I pronounce it Stour. But if you're from Suffolk, you pronounce it Stour, and we're right on the border. So like half of us say Stour and half of us say Stour. So I was like, Andy and I even had like a real argument over how I should pronounce it for them. But they decided on Stour actually, so I was outvoted anyway. But yeah, that was a really interesting thing to do. So that's sort of my week. What about you? What have you been up to? How are the edits?
Oh, the edits. Well, I have finished the second round of structural edits and I sent them off to Imogen yesterday.
Hey.
And that was a relief. I mean, I did have quite a lot of time to do them in a way because I'd been on holiday and Imogen, as you know, we share an editor, for those who don't know, was also on holiday. So I did have plenty of time to do them. And so I think sometimes that can be a blessing and a curse because I was thinking, I've got loads of time, I'll just do a few little bits. I'll do this that day and this tomorrow. And that was fine. That's how I like working, because I hate being pressured. But as always happens in my life, lots of interruptions, elderly parents going in and out of hospital, visits to doctors, blah, blah, blah. And on top of all that, we are moving. So we've been sort of, what it's like. It's stressful, isn't it, when you're moving home? And we exchanged contracts now and we're completing on Friday and we are moving on Monday. I mean, it's been a mess in my study. Those of you who watch this on YouTube.
It's been a mess for weeks, Lesley. We've all been commenting behind your back.
I am so sorry. You must be absolutely appalled. But do you know what? It's so difficult because we've been trying to sort of pack and live and carry on as best we can. And I've just given up now. The house is a tip. And so literally after we finish this podcast, I'm starting to do more packing and organising and things because we're going very soon. So so that's, and for, I don't know if I mentioned this on the podcast before, but we were intending to buy a property in Suffolk and settle here. But since we'd made that decision and rented here, we've had 3 grandchildren and they're all in Kent, so we have decided to move there as well. And one of the advantages, as well as being near the grandchildren, will be that I'm literally only a short train ride away from London, which means I'll be able to go to events like we did the other week
Yeah,
to
so much easier.
without having to sort of fork out to stay in a hotel. I'll be able to come home the same night, which is great. I
Although
can't
that was really good the other day, because so Lesley got a hotel
yes.
and then she got a free bottle of Prosecco and messaged me and said, "Are you going to be early?" I was like, "Yeah, of course." And so I went to our hotel tonight and we necked that bottle of Prosecco pretty well. I felt dreadful the next day.
We necked that bottle very quickly, didn't we? Yes, I had a lovely room, didn't I? We were sort of sat there just knocking it back and feeling very pleased with ourselves.
Yes, I regret it deeply now. But
yes. The next morning I did regret it deeply. Yes. Oh, and we didn't mention the cupcakes at Natalie's.
Oh yes, they were lovely, weren't they?
I don't know who made them. I think it was her sister or her cousin.
Yeah.
Oh, they were
lovely.
Really, really lovely.
Yeah, really nice.
Okay, right. So
it's my turn. I'm going to ask you.
It's your turn. I'm looking at my little notes.
I'm so ill. So what about smoke and mirrors? Because it is such a fine line, isn't it? As thriller writers, we need to weave in all those red herrings and misdirects, keep the reader on their toes, but we cannot, it's forbidden to outrightly lie to them. So you can't have a reader thinking, I didn't kill him, and then them actually having killed them. You can like have lots of guilt and lots of different ways of saying and doing things, but you can't specifically lie to them. And it can just be really hard to sort of mislead them to that point. Which is just enough that the reader then looks back and thinks, oh, that's what you meant, very clever. And I do just think the best reviews are the ones that were like, well, I just had to open the book from the start and read it all again to see what you've done there. And that's amazing, isn't it? That it's so hard to achieve. So what do you think about it, Lesley? Any tips?
Well, I think it's a perennial problem, isn't it, for writers in our genre, because, we have to surprise them. And I think it's perfectly acceptable, isn't it, to hoodwink our readers. We have to, because they want to be surprised and thrilled, and we need to give them the twists that they crave. And you're right, it is all about misdirection, isn't it? It's about burying clues in other bits of action. But I think what you were saying about characters can't outright lie to us. No, they can't, but in a sense they can sometimes, because, for example, if they've had memory lapses, because a lot of, characters in psychological thrillers have problems with memory. Maybe they've had trauma or they're repressing something. So, or various reasons that they can't remember, or that
they're unreliable narrator.
They're choosing not to remember, or they're deluding themselves,
so true.
Or if you've set it up in the way that it's your frame story is like a narrator recounting their story to someone else. Yeah. They might be lying, and that brings us on, doesn't it, to the unreliable narrator, which is a fascinating topic, and we all love unreliable narrators, don't we? And in a sense, most of our main characters in psychological thrillers are a little bit unreliable.
I think they sometimes have to be, don't they? You can't have a really straight and honest character who pays their taxes and does all the good things and makes to-do lists all the time without being unhinged as well. It's certainly something I think I hone on my second draft, because I think I like to, when I'm planning, I'll put at the start of the scene, like I'm trying to think of an example. I was about to mention an example in my actual book then, but John is being interviewed by the police and I'll just have that one line and I'll say what I want the reader to hear and think versus what's actually happening, so I can hold both those things in my head as I'm forming his replies and things like that. So that's sort of my tip for how I manage it. But I think I normally, the first draft is just about getting the story down, and the second draft is really trying to mislead people as much as possible.
Absolutely, and although I'm not as meticulous a planner as you, I do that sort of once I've sort of got about halfway through, I start to plan more, and I do like a word table, simple word table, where I've got what actually happens, and then I've got a column what I want the reader to be thinking at this point.
Excellent.
So
exactly the same as me.
I think you have to, don't you, because you've got to hold those two,
hold them both. So that's the thing the editors always come to you back with, being like, oh, what do you want the reader to be thinking here?
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, tell me,
what do you want them to be thinking?
But I think we ought to get Imran on now to give us his thoughts, because he is the master at misdirection and smoke and mirrors, isn't he? So Welcome to the show, Imran Mahmood.
Hi, Imran. Thank you so much for joining us on In Suspense. And before we dive into our questions, can you introduce yourself to our listeners, please?
Hi, my name is Imran Mahmood. I am the writer of standalone thrillers, and I'm also a practicing criminal barrister.
Exciting. And lots of other amazing things as well. For instance, you've been longlisted for the 2023 Theakston Old Peculiar Crime Novel of the Year award. And your first novel, You Don't Know Me, was shortlisted for the Glass Bell Award in 2018 and was dramatised by the BBC in 2021. So got a few other accolades there to mention, I think. Very modest of you. And All I Said Was True came out in hardback last year and paperback in April. I loved the book, and what I loved about it was how you took the reader on a really intense journey where they didn't know who to trust. It was utterly engrossing and one of my favourite reads of the year as well, actually. Would you tell us what the book is about, please?
Yes, thank you very much for those kind comments. That's really very nice to hear. Thank you. Yes, so it is, so the main character, the protagonist, is a lady called Layla. She is a lawyer, and the book opens with her being interviewed by the police. And it starts, in fact, with the police caution, the one that you will hear on TV a lot. You do not have to say anything. And I thought that'd be a great way to introduce this whole story. And it's essentially a ticking clock mystery because in real life cases, the police have a limited amount of time to charge a suspect or to release them from custody. And so the police are, and she's playing a game here with the police where she's essentially stringing them along, and the police are trying to do what they can to make sure they've got enough evidence to charge her. So it's a question of whether there is enough there. And the chapters flip between the now scenes where we are in the police interview with her and they're in the present, and then the kind of past scenes where the character is telling us what happened. So we've got that kind of dichotomy between what she's telling the reader and what she's telling the police, and where the differences lie, and you know which bit is true. You know, she says, "All I said was true." The question is, to whom? Is that to us, or is it to the police?
Excellent. Yes, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's a fantastic book. And your first book, You Don't Know Me, was a courtroom thriller, wasn't it? And All I Said Was True is mainly set in a police interview room, isn't it? And the main character, Layla, who's brilliant, she's a lawyer, isn't she? And she's clearly thinking as a lawyer as she's answering these police questions, because she's been accused of murdering someone, hasn't she? Yeah. And, you know, I love legal thrillers. And so what I was wondering was, with your extensive experience as a barrister, is that where you draw your inspiration? Is that where you get these amazing ideas from, the court cases you've been involved with or know about? Is that how these?
Yeah, I think it so far has totally depended on the book. So with You Don't Know Me, that's kind of loosely based on a number of cases I was involved in, which were murders, and there were murder cases involving young defendants. And for You Don't Know Me, the thing that I was most concerned about was this idea of kind of justice potentially failing certain groups of people. So young black people, young black men in particular, are disproportionately much more likely to be stopped by police, interviewed by the police, prosecuted and convicted, and to be in prison. And I wondered why that was. And it's partly, I think, just a failing in the system. But because we know that, for example, that people who grow up or live in really nice parts of London or the country are less likely to be involved in gang culture. So if you're hanging around Knightsbridge, you're less likely to be in a criminal gang. Whereas if you're living in some parts of more deprived areas of London, the pressures are much greater. So you already start off at a huge disadvantage, because you've got the disadvantage of race and colour, the disadvantage of education or lack of education, facilities, the disadvantage of poverty or access to wealth. access to support. So there's all of those things playing in. And so, you've created conditions where, the likelihood of somebody being involved in crime is just much higher. And I wondered, whether there was a way of solving that. And then once you're in the system, and You Don't Know Me, he's the defendant's, that book is, as you know, is essentially a closing speech to the jury. And what he's doing is he's doing his own speech, and he's really saying, look, my lawyer would want you to know these particular facts and legal arguments, but the things which are important to me are different from those things. I want you to know, kind of try and feel what it's like to be somebody in my shoes. And if you were in my shoes, would you walk exactly the same path? Would you make the same choices, faced with the same challenges?
Yeah, amazing. And what you do so well in the books is make it sound so exciting. And we know from speaking with Graham Bartlett before that he's spoken a lot about how police work can be really tedious and painstaking at times. And I imagine the same is the case for the law, if not more. So how do you ensure that you strike the right balance between authenticity and the drama that the thriller readers crave?
Yeah, I mean, I love Graham, and I think he's completely right. So, but there are, I think what happens is, the reason the world is taken by crime and crime stories, or courtroom dramas, or police procedurals, is because although most of the kind of surrounding work is quite dull and mundane and tedious, what you have is these pockets of very high drama within the professions. So in policing, yes, there's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of time spent kind of doing all the investigative work and putting cases together, but there are these high points. So, for example, police. I've read and listened to hundreds of police interviews. It doesn't matter what a suspect is being interviewed for. I find them fascinating, all of them, because you've immediately got this pitting of wits between one person and the next, if they're giving answers, and that's just kind of spellbinding to listen to, because the police are putting evidence to the guy, or usually a guy, and then he's coming up with an answer on the fly quite often. And then how that story unravels is also fascinating, because I've read papers where I've thought, God, I don't know how the defendant's going to answer all of this evidence. And then he's in the interview room and he comes out with this explanation. As I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, because that's really a compelling explanation, which I hadn't thought of. I hadn't thought that this would be your defense. So to make it interesting, you have to take, I think, the points of high drama and concentrate on those when you're putting them in the book. The same with courtrooms. Yeah, there's a lot of time where I'm sitting at home and I'm reading through 1,000 pages or 10,000 pages of documents, which is really dull. There are also parts in a trial when you're in front of the jury which are actually quite dull, and they are dealing with the witnesses which aren't, not eyewitnesses, but kind of factual witnesses dealing with establishing groundwork. Like you might have a scientific witness who spends a day saying, well, this is how cell sites work, and this is where the masts operate, and this is how they triangulate movement, and this, and that could be a day of just listening to that. So avoid all of that, but just get to the bit where, the defendant is being cross-examined. You don't even necessarily want them being chiefed. So there are two bits of examination. So there's the bit where, if it's your witness, you lead him through what you want to say. And then there's the cross-examination where you can just pile in. So I would say just pick the bits which are dramatic and kind of genuinely interesting to you as a writer. Then they're more likely to be interesting to a reader, I think.
Yeah,
it's cutting out the boring bits, isn't it? I think I read an interview you did once, or something you'd written for Penguin, I can't remember, where you said when you first started writing, you gave your book to your wife. And did she say something about, write like this, but make it less boring or something?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I had written the first draft of this book and I'd given it to her, and I asked her what she thought of it, and she said, yeah, it's really good, but make it like that but less boring. And And so then I rewrote it and I gave that one to her, and she said, yeah, that's quite good. And I said, do you think it could be published? And she said, yes, I do, because I've read loads of books which are published, which are much worse than this.
Oh, such a compliment.
Yeah, I think that's called damning with faint praise, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, your books are certainly not boring. They're absolutely thrilling. I mean, you kind of sort of touched on this in your previous answer, but why do you think legal thrillers are so very popular? I mean, what is it about them that captivates readers and viewers? You know, because we love watching them on the screen as well, and we loved watching your first novel on the screen too. What is it about them, do you think?
I think the world is very chaotic, and so when you're dealing with real life crimes, 90% of crimes, you know, aren't very exciting, and they don't have a satisfactory resolution, either because the white suspect isn't identified, or they are and the verdict isn't the correct one, or they are and the whole thing isn't satisfying, because what you learn about a real defendant is so complex and so gritty and messy that it just doesn't give you the satisfaction that you would crave. So I'll just give you one example. So you might have, let's say you've got a reasonably serious crime of, I don't know, let's take a murder. In real life, what probably happened is you've got a 16-year-old and he's stabbed, let's say he stabbed another 16-year-old. And in a fictionalized version of this, what you've got is the process through which that suspect is identified, the process through which he is brought to trial, and once you've gone through all the dramatic bits, the process where he's convicted. And then you've got a kind of a lovely resolution, everyone's happy, and you've brought the world from chaos into order. But in real life, what happens, even if you get a conviction, is you learn that this defendant is from a childhood which is very traumatic. He might have parents who mistreated him. He might have experienced a tragedy in his young life. He might have a father or a mother who is addicted to drugs or in prison. He might have been raised in care. He might have been the subject of abuse. But there are going to be a number of not very pleasant, complicating features of his life, which have together combined to lead him to a path of some kind of criminality. And so in real life, when you get the conviction, it's not a satisfactory resolution. What it is that in a way, it's an indictment of the world we're in, that this can happen and that these awful things can happen. And somebody's lost a young life, but also there's another young life here, which, and you're allowed to hold two competing thoughts in your head at the same time in real life. And, a person isn't just the crime that they've committed, that all of the other complexities which go with it. And it's sad. Real life is chaotic and it's sad. Whereas if you fictionalize it, you can get everything you want out of it. People used to say, why do you write about crime when you're in crime? And I would say, because I can't control the ending. In a real case, all I can do is go through a case, present it, fingers crossed, over to the jury. They tell me whether the guy is guilty or not guilty. Fiction, and also in real cases, you can get really dark. You can, particularly if you're doing sex cases, and if you're doing them back to back, it can be quite miserable. It takes a toll on you psychologically. It's really hard work, and there's no kind of sense of catharsis when you do that kind of work. Whereas you can choose the crime that you want to do. You can choose the ending. You can choose your characters. They don't have to be complex if you don't want them to be complex. They can be, a baddie can be a baddie if that's how you want them to be. You can write it how you want. And that, I think, accounts for why all crime, either fictionalized or what they call true crime, is so popular. It's because of this process of putting chaos into order. Because the true crimes that they choose aren't the kind of run-of-the-mill ones where people have these where they have these difficult and complicated backgrounds. They're the ones which seem easy. So I don't know whether you watched The Staircase.
Yeah,
it's a great one for true crime because he's educated. He's otherwise got all of the privileges of a white middle class man, but he's committed a murder. Maybe, great one to watch.
yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, however you come down on it, it's not going to leave you feeling dissatisfied.
Yeah, it's so true. You speak with such passion and empathy, Imran, which is lovely to hear as well, because I imagine you must get quite jaded in your job that you face. You just mentioned a bit about back-to-back cases, but you speak with such passion about it. So I think if I ever find myself in court, I do hope it's on your right side anyway. But I just wanted to touch again on the format for All I Said Was True, because as you said at the start, it alternates between the present, where Layla's in the police station being interviewed for murder that she says she didn't commit, and then we have the past chapters where we see the run up to the murder. The chapters are so sharp and they're short, and it just keeps you wanting more, and it's so tight as well, and you get to the end of one scene, you're like, what's going to happen, but then you're on to the next bit. And I wondered, because I'm always fascinated by how stories are written, I wondered how you went about writing the book. Did you write them as the reader reads them, alternating, or did you write them in blocks of one and then the other and then sort of weave them in?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question, actually. And it partly goes back to the question, which is the really polarizing question, which is, are you a plotter or not? Yeah. I once heard Lee Child speaking to John Grisham, one of the huge names, and they were talking about this. And if it was John Grisham, he said, "I know I have to plot this meticulously, and you can't have a book unless it's meticulously plotted, because the parts have got to interlock and it's got to be precise. Otherwise, you're not going to get what you intend." And Lee Child said, "I don't plot a thing because I want to know how it ends. And if I plotted, I'd already know how it ended, and it just wouldn't work." And so the answer to your question is, I have to write it sequentially because I don't plot it. I mean, I've got a overall plot. I've got a very skeletal plot, so I know the start, I know the middle, I know the end, I know roughly where it's going, but I don't know the detail of it. And for me, it's important because I've tried to plot these books. What happens is the characters end up doing things, or I end up trying to make them do things that they wouldn't do. And it's really hard. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you've got to go and confront this guy now, but she's saying, I don't want to do that now. I'm feeling traumatized by something, and I need to sit here and let this all wash over me. And I don't want to go and see him right now anyway because I've got other things to do.
Yeah.
So I had to write them sequentially. And I know people who will write the book, and then at the end they'll decide which order they go in. And they'll completely they'll just write 50 or 100 chapters, and then they'll go, now I have to decide how to order them, which I find kind of mind-blowing.
That's balmy, isn't it? Everyone else's processes always seems nuts to your own, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I think my next question is sort of also process based, because our topic today is It's All Smoke and Mirrors. And it's about how far we can go as thriller writers to mislead our readers, because obviously we have to mislead them, don't we? Because they're craving the surprise and the shock and the revelations and the twists. And All I Said Was True is a fantastic example of smoke and mirrors, isn't it? Because you're drip feeding little clues into each chapter, And I suppose you've kind of answered this already. I mean, I was wondering how conscious you are of this technique. You say you're not planning and you're doing it as you go, but are you aware of drip feeding those things in, or does that come more at the editing stage, whether you're sort of okay, I've got to make sure the reader's thinking this in that chapter? Or is that an organic thing as you go along?
Again, another great question. So this idea of having reliable and unreliable narrators, for me, is fascinating, because on the one hand, there is this sacred contract with the reader, and then on the other hand, there's reality, and reality tells you that people lie, and not just some people lie, all people lie at some point. And some people lie more than others. They lie so much, in fact, that even when they're in a courtroom, the first thing that you have to do to a witness or to a jury is to swear them and get them to say on a thing which is more precious to them than their own lives used to be. Swear on a holy book, I'm going to tell you the truth, which is, it's bizarre that you have to get to that stage. So yeah, so we lie. So we've got to, in a way, represent that in order to get a piece of fiction which is grounded in reality. There's got to be that. But I think it's important that when in the context of a novel, where a character is lying, that they're lying to themselves, or they're doing in circumstances where you can reasonably expect that they might lie. So, for example, in an interview, there's at least a 50% chance that they're going to lie. And you know that you go into an interview, reading an interview, knowing that they're either telling the police the truth or they're trying to get out of trouble. So we can expect it. But when they're talking directly to the reader, they can't lie openly to the reader, because then that does destroy that kind of bond, that contract. And that ends up destroying the whole fabric of the way the novel is constructed. Because if at any stage you can say, oh, what I said 20 minutes ago is all a lie, then, what have we been reading?
Yeah.
If the witness believes something because of and as long as you put that into the novel so that it doesn't come out of the blue. If a witness has suffered trauma, for example, in I Know What I Saw, which was my second book, the witness in that case is a man who lives on the street, the protagonist, and he has been on the street for 30 years. And when he's thinking things and when he's seeing things and saying things, these are things he believes. And it's only as we go through it that we realize that the trauma that he's faced has been responsible for some of the things that he sees. We're just kind of going along with him, and that revelation comes to him at the same time as it comes to us, and then he realizes, oh, these are the things which are, which are true. And for me, when writing All I Said Was True, that the idea of drip feeding the clues was really not done consciously in that way, but what I was trying to do was to inhabit the character, so that I'm behaving kind of authentically to that character. So whatever that character would do or say, or feel, or have to experience to get to the next stage of that journey, happens on the page, and then you don't have to go back and those plot points in, because this is, she'd had to do this thing in order to get to the next bit.
Yeah, that's almost like the I can never pronounce this, Stanislavski method of acting, where they inhabit the character, and that's what you're doing in the writing, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely, embodying their thought processes. Yeah,
like a kind of method. But that was taught to me by my first editor, who because I didn't realize I'd been doing this, but he did and told me, which was he read that entire book out loud in order to work out whether it worked, because a lot of it's kind of in first person dialogue addressed to a jury. So that's what he would do. And I hadn't realised, but that's what I do when I'm writing it. I'm reading out the words as I'm writing it in my head for their rhythm. And that process of choosing the right words isn't really about what the right words are. It's about the rhythm that it creates in your head. So a lot of people listen to music when they write. I can't do that because I can't hear the words.
No, I know
I
what you
can't
mean.
either, no.
Yeah. That's such a great tip. And that was actually my next question, which wasn't about tip, but I think inhabiting the character's head is such a good idea when it comes to how to mislead the reader. Lesley, do you want to ask your next
Yes, well,
question?
because your next question was basically, you've covered that, Imran,
Yeah.
brilliantly.
Brilliantly, yeah.
We wanted to know about your journey to becoming an author, because as you know, we said earlier, I think you've got 30 years plus experience as a barrister. So what made you decide to start writing? Was it something you'd always wanted to do, or how did it come about?
I'd always written something. They were usually short stories. And what would happen was I'd read, I don't know, Julian Barnes. And then I'd think, oh, this is really great. And then it would kind of inspire me to write something. So I'd write something, not really for anyone, it'd just go in my drawer. And then one day I was sitting in chambers and I was writing something, and somebody said, what are you writing? And I said, I'm just writing a short story. And every week or whatever, I would hand them over and she'd read them and usually say, well, that's really depressing. And then I'd write another one. And then eventually she said, but everything you write is really depressing. And I think what it must have been is the kind of that sense that you need to kind of expunge whatever it is that's in your head or in your heart, get it out onto the page, and then it's done. And then the more crime I was doing, the more I needed to do that. I needed to get out those kind of complex feelings around, let's say it's justice, for example, or equality, or memory, or I feel a thing that I need to get out. And so I just write it down. And then for You Don't Know Me, what happened was that I was in the middle of a murder trial and I was writing a closing speech just at the moment that I had walked past a defendant who was sacking his lawyer and saying, you're just shit. I could do a better job than you. And they were having that discussion as I was walking past. And I got to the roping room as I was writing the speech, and I thought, God, what if he had to do his own speech? What would it be like? And my client was really bright. He was extraordinarily bright, but a young black male from the inner, what used to be called the inner city. And I thought, actually, that's quite interesting, because he would be able to do it. It would be different, and it would be quite powerful, and he'd be able to say things that I couldn't say. And what would it say? So I started writing that speech, and then it carried on.
Wow.
Carried on. And then it was 60,000 words, and then I thought, that's the one I gave to my wife, and she said, yeah, I've read loads of things worse than this, and they're published. So to send it off to an agent, and I did, and I was really lucky, and I slightly hate saying this because I sent it off to a few agents, and a few agents came back and said, yeah, we'd like it. So I was in a really fortunate position, and I think that was timing. It just happened to be kind of catch a particular moment where true crime was coming in. I don't know, this drive for authenticity and something new. I was just really lucky, and I see the number of people now who are, particularly post-pandemic, who are trying to be published or who are being published, and the number of books out there in the market. It's really, really, really hard out there, and I really feel them. I think I feel quite bad that
it is hard, but then there are so many more ways to get published now than there were even 10, 15 years ago. So there's so many more publishers and who accept direct submissions. So I mean, I do agree with what you're saying, because it's a tough market, and it's tough for us to have to keep competing as well, and have to keep we never feel on stable ground, do we? But I mean, we're fortunate to be in a place where there is so many more opportunities, at least.
Yeah, and I think you're lucky, Imran, because you must have this huge store of stories, because the legal profession and all the cases and interviews you've been involved in, it's just about stories, isn't it? People's stories and things that have happened. So you've got this, presumably this huge store of nuggets that you can draw on for books to come.
Well, the funny thing is that a closing speech is really a story. It's a kind of short story. My old pupil master used to say, it's no good just telling the jury the facts, because they'll never remember them. They'll never, if you say to a jury, the fingerprints, have 6 points of correspondence with the defendant's fingerprints, so you've got to wonder whether that's enough evidence, and then let's look at this DNA evidence, and there are, it's on a movable bit of item, it's on a movable item, so it could have been transported there. Then you give them another bit of information, and they'll go away, and some of that will stick. But isn't it much nicer to be able to say, imagine you're walking down the street when X and Y happens, and you drop your cigarette, and you walk away, and you think of that the day is no different from any other day. But what you don't know is that behind you, some child picks up that cigarette end because he's 14 and he's never smoked before, and he tries to light it, doesn't, and ends up throwing it into a garden half a mile away or whatever, and that's where the burglary happened. And then you've got to ask yourself, that's a much more compelling way of putting that argument.
So really, you've been storytelling for 30 years in a way with your closing speeches.
Because
Amazing.
I think you have to do that. And in fact, before you even get to the speech, you're telling the story. And again, when you're doing a criminal trial, my pupil master said to me, you've got to show the jury the way home. In other words, you've got to, don't just
show, don't tell.
Exactly. So, people like to come to their own conclusions. So let them come to conclusions themselves.
And are you able to give us any hints about what the next book is going to be about?
So I'm really genuinely excited about the next one. This is probably what everybody says, but I really, really am. And probably more than the debut, even, if that's possible. It would have been ready this year and out this year. I was lucky enough to get a US publisher who wanted it, and so to have them publish at the same time, late until the spring. It is a book about a couple whose child goes missing. All I can really tell you about it is that it's in alternating voices. There is at some stage a murder. There is at some stage a trial.
Wow.
There's quite a lot of trauma. There is a fortune teller.
Wow, you're ticking all the boxes here. So enticing.
But there was something about this book, whenever I read it back, it just pulls something from my chest.
That sounds like a good sign. If you're really excited about something, that's always a good sign, isn't it? That the book is something special. So we'll look forward to that one.
I was told by my agent once that the people who think their books are really great, they usually produce terrible books.
Oh no, I don't know if that's always true. I think we have to have passion, don't we? For
quite often. Yeah. But anyway, I'm often kind of slightly reduced to tears when I read this one.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. We love to ask our guests what they're reading at the moment. So have you got anything you'd like to recommend to us?
I've been reading a lot of crime fiction. What have I read recently? I have read Janice Hallett's Alperton Angels, which is
Yeah.
everything she does is pretty amazing. I
Yeah.
love Lots of Code when she did it. I have just read Rob Rinder, The Trial.
Oh yeah.
I have read The Misper by Kate London. That's really good. I have got a proof of Louise Doughty's A Bird in Winter. My God.
Wow.
Oh yes.
Yeah, well, I love Louise because she writes crime fiction in a way that kind of nobody else does, I think, or very few people do. It's just so clever. Characters kind of have depth. I love it. I've recently read A Square of Sevens by Laura.
Oh, I'm going to talk about
Shephard-Robinson. Yes, that's a brilliant novel, isn't it? She's such a good writer, isn't she?
Yeah.
The depth and the imagery and the language, the inventive language she uses, it's fantastic. Really, really good. Yeah.
Yes.
That woman's got an imagination to die for. I don't know how she does it. There must be some black magic going on.
Yes, yeah. Well, and the research as well. That was amazing.
Black Thorn by Sarah Hilary. Again, another brilliant book, another brilliant writer. I mean,
that's more than enough.
Yes, that's loads. Yes, brilliant. What about you, Lesley? What have you been reading?
Well, as I was explaining at the beginning, it's been quite a stressful month for me this month because I've been finishing my edits on my next book, on book 5, and we're also moving house, and so exchanging contracts and completing and moving, and hence the mess in the background, Imran. So and elderly parents in and out of hospital, which isn't conducive to relaxed reading. So I haven't done as much as I would normally do, but I mean, I've got some proofs that I'm reading, that I will be about to start reading: Notes on a Disappearance by B.P. Walters, The Babysitter by Emma Curtis, and I've been sent one called The Square by Celia Walden. So I haven't started them yet because I'm just woefully behind with anything that isn't the chaos that is my life at the moment.
That's okay. What have I been reading? So I obviously just read All I Said Was True, which is brilliant.
Oh, I've read that. I did read that.
And The Babysitter by Emma Curtis, I just finished reading that. It was fantastic, really gripping and surprising thriller. So one to check out. And I'm listening to The Square of Sevens now by Laura Shephard-Robinson. I'm really enjoying it. It's so captivating, and I'm almost glad there's a train strike on the way to Harrogate that I'll be able to drive. And so I'm listening to it a bit now, but I'm going to save a good 4 hours for the car journey, I think. So that'll be good.
Who's the narrator for?
Oh, that's a really good question. I'll have to look it up.
We shall find that.
I'll put it on the I will put it on
the
thing. Yes, the
I was so
description.
impressed by the way that all of these audio books are narrated on the whole. They're so brilliantly done.
Yes, they are. It's such a talent.
It must be exhausting. I saw Adam Deacon, who did You Don't Know Me, in the studio recording. They invited me into the studio to watch him recording it, and it was incredible. He was in a tiny booth with headphones on, and the next booth was his producer, and he'd read a line 5 times. Each line was being read 5 times until the producer went, "Yeah, next one."
Yeah, no, in fact I got to record some audio for my last book, which was really good fun. I got to be one of the characters, and it is hard work. Yes,
it's very hard work. Can you imagine narrating? You think you can do it, because I mean, like you, Imran, I read aloud to edit. I read my stuff aloud, but actually to read the whole novel aloud is something else, isn't it? That's hard work for the voice. Yeah.
The Square of Sevens is narrated by Imogen Wilde. So worth checking out on audio. Yes,
definitely.
I think I've come across her voice before. But
yeah, I think I have. She's lovely.
Well, sadly, that's all we've got time for. So thank you so much for talking to us today, Imran. We've really enjoyed talking to you. And if you haven't read All I Said Was True, I suggest you go out and buy it straight away, because you won't be disappointed.
Yes, do. And Imran is appearing on Friday panel at Harrogate Crime Writing Festival. So do check that out. And he's going to be at Capital Crime. So you'll definitely get to see him if you're going to either of those events. And on our next and final episode of the series, we are talking to Holly Seddon on what does it mean to write commercial fiction. I think we're all going to be there for that.
I think
one,
all
aren't we?
three of us.
Give it a
Nikki
try,
will be
yeah.
joining us. Yes.
Lovely.
Oh, and a
I'm
big
excited.
shout out. I meant to say in our introduction, shout out to Nikki Smith, because her latest book, The Beach Party, seems to be taking over W.H. Smith
everywhere.
Travel.
Yeah, so exciting.
It's brilliant. It's everywhere. But unfortunately, that leaves me with the final task of saying goodbye from Imran.
Thank you very much for having me, both of you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. And goodbye from Lauren.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from me.